Hiebert.
The first statement's to Michael.
I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome here, everyone. And at this time, I'd like to give the opening to Councillor Jake Hiebert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to expound on the virtues of strategic voting a half hour before the polls close. I will leave that to the more astute members on council. Frustrated. Henry, stop, I yell as I see a male lurking in the shadows. No, don't drink that. Before I could get to him, he drank the whole bottle of rubbing alcohol. The year was 1971 and I was walking the beat on North Main in Winnipeg. I told Henry he was under arrest for being intoxicated, and when asked, he advised he did not have a permanent address or fixed address, nor did he have a job or a visible means of support. I then charged him with vagrancy, section 179 of the Criminal Code. Next day, he would be fingerprinted, photographed, and appear before a judge. The penalty at the time was a maximum of $50 or, in default, up to 6 months. First offences were a lot less severe, with a default of 7 days in jail. Henry and others like him would usually take the default time. This was my first exposure to homelessness. Coming from Cleveland, I had never experienced this. The vagrancy law definition was later changed in 1972. Then there was Noel Carver, a 60-year-old man I met frequently. He lived in an all-black community of North Preston, just southeast of Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. In the late 80s, Noel was living in a shack 10 by 12. The wind blew through the slats in the wall. He slept on a stack of newspapers 2 feet high. Although he had more than 20 children, none of them would take care of him. The prevalent philosophy among black men in the community is to have as many children as possible. Noel had over 40 children. But the philosophy among black men is, when I grows old, one of them will look after me. I heard this frequently. Sadly, many families will not allow their dads or husbands to live with them. Noel was my friend for 5 years while I lived there. I would bring him coffees when patrolling in the community, or at Christmas, bring him a dinner, and maybe even an old RCMP parka. Around 2015, while on the Parole Board of Canada, I had opportunity to interview an individual who lived on the banks of the Red River and was in jail because he stabbed a couple of people. This person had published 2 books, had a degree, and was a computer programmer. Living on the riverbank, if somebody stared at him, he would chase them and attempt to stab them. Around the same time, on a number of occasions, I would meet with Vic on the streets of Saskatoon. He was formerly from southern Manitoba, telling me about having a Bible study with the President of the United States. He was dressed in camouflage military gear and received his money through a public trustee. He finally got into a rooming house in Saskatoon, but sadly, last fall, he burned to death in that room. Steinbach is not exempt from homelessness. When the opportunity presents itself, I speak to numerous homeless individuals. One such fellow identifies himself as preacher. Last fall, he was living behind a church on Lone Boulevard. This summer, he was living next to the Baptist church. The guy in the tent beside him just went to jail for car theft. The guy in the orange tent at the north end of the property recently moved. Preacher considered him dangerous. The guy living in the tent underneath the evergreen near the old clinic, who I speak to frequently, moved to a house several months previously. I saw a preacher last week early in the morning, walking his bicycle, pulling all his worldly possessions on a homemade cart. He was moving near the creek and behind Lettingham. Preacher has a house in Sprague, but would rather live on the streets in Steinbach. As you may have noticed, I enjoy speaking to people I meet, especially the homeless. We speak at length, often to the chagrin of my wife, who was on the walk with me. I spoke to an employee at Helping Hands and was surprised to hear that 1 or 2 homeless persons during the year obtain their food here. I know that many of our communities spend endless hours providing certain necessities for the homeless. I genuinely applaud them for their compassion and empathy. Similar groups advertise how they are serving more and more homeless people each year. I know that people live homeless for various reasons, some by choice and others by circumstances. Are we as a society enabling this culture to grow, or should our efforts and focus be more on addressing long-term issues such as mental health, shelters, and unemployment? This is much more expensive, requires more trained professionals, and a willingness of government to address the situation head-on. In the interest of helping the individuals, reducing homelessness, and not acquiring more votes. From walking the beat in Winnipeg to now 52 years later, the homeless situation, not only in Canada but also around the world, has grown from a couple of individuals in Winnipeg to communities exceeding 3,000 in California. The Bible instructs us to care for the needy and the homeless. Now, 52 years later, I still have more questions than answers. I am left frustrated.
Thank you, Councillor Hiebert. Council, we have the agenda in front of us, looking for a motion to adopt. Councillor Siemens, second by Councillor Schweikster. Any comments?
Sir.
Call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Council, we have the minutes of September 19th, 2023, the regular council meeting, starting on page 1. We've all have a chance to review, looking for a motion to approve. Councillor Hiebert, second by Councillor Penner. Any comments?
No comments.
Call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Council, is there any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, we'll move on. There's no public hearing, no delegation. We'll move on to 8A, reports and recommendations from the city manager. This is the parking report that we had asked for Henry Street and Ash Street. Mr. Worthing, could you please introduce this file?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I will defer to the city's corporate services manager, Adam Thiessen, to provide the report.
Yes, thank you. As you said, Earl, this report has been prepared in response to Council's request back in May of 2023, when a letter from a resident on Ash Avenue had been received with concerns specifically regarding Henry Street and Ash Street. So on page 4 of your council package, we've got a map just showing the parking restrictions in the area presently. And that's how they normally would be, with the exception of Hospital Street, which is presently all no parking, just due to the heavy construction volume for the Bethesda Hospital addition, as well as the event center that's going on right now. So administration met with the Bethesda Hospital management to inquire about the hospital's provision of off-street parking for its staff. And according to their calculations, they do have sufficient parking for their staff. City staff also reviewed the hospital as it is today and the Steinbach zoning bylaw to see if it would still meet the parking requirements in our zoning bylaw today. And yes, it does, as it is. But what we did find in that discussion is that the biggest challenge is that many hospital staff choose to park in on-street spots rather than their designated off-street spots, and for the sake of convenience and proximity to their buildings. Further to that meeting, administration went door to door in the area requesting feedback from residents along portions of Henry Street and Ash Street. Residents were asked to provide input regarding the permitted on-street parking in the neighborhood and of any concerns they might have. Henry Street residents interviewed with properties between Lowen and Reimer gave feedback that they'd like to see 2-hour parking. North of Ash there, you can see where there's some green areas. There's no parking restrictions, but those residents would like to see 2-hour parking along that stretch of Henry. And of the Ash Street residents that were interviewed, none of them wanted further parking restrictions along there. All of them did express concerns with seeing too much, or seeing parking too close to stop signs, as well as from time to time blocking driveways. And taking a look at parking tickets issued in the area, year to date we've seen about 59 issued just along Henry and 1 or 2 along Ash there. So it's not because there haven't been any parking tickets issued. Parking around the hospital is a concern for 3 primary groups of people, really. Homeowners, hospital patients, and hospital employees. So with these findings and perspectives in mind, administration reviewed and came up with some options summarized on pages 6 and 7. recommendation from administration is to proceed with options 1 and 4, which would be extending 2-hour parking zones along Henry Street north of Ash Avenue towards Lowen, and then also transitioning Hospital Street to 2-hour parking zones once construction at the hospital and event center are complete. The idea behind this was that it'd add room for short-term hospital visitors to park closer to the hospital, and then also encourage hospital staff to park in their assigned parking lots during daytime hours. And then further to that, option 4 would be to send a formal request to Southern Health Manitoba and the Bethesda Hospital to ensure that their staff park in designated off-street parking areas to reduce the total number of hospital staff parking on the street there. That's a recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Thiessen. Okay, council. We've all had a chance to review this, and you've heard the summary from Mr. Thiessen. How would you like to proceed? Councillor Swagstra?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will make a motion that we proceed with adopting the report and specifically proceeding with options 1 and 4 as recommended.
Are you seconding?
I'll second.
Second by Councillor Siemens. Go ahead, Councillor Swagstra.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased with the thoroughness of the report and the work that city staff have undergone here, taking the time to meet both with Bethesda Hospital management to talk about the challenges, and also to go door to door and speak to residents in the area to find out from them what the situation is for them and what changes they'd like to see. I think that's very proactive. We had asked for this report, and I think it has the appropriate level of detail. We know that parking in that area is a challenge, and with the construction there, the challenge is even worse now. I think that the recommendations here, the options that we're going to proceed with, if this motion passes, will help. I think it makes sense extending the 2-hour parking zones along Henry Street, and then also, once construction of the hospital is complete, transitioning Hospital Street to 2-hour parking zones. Again, sending a clear message that that the parking needs to turn over on a regular basis, because when people visit the hospital, one of the key things is you don't want vehicles that are sitting out there all day, and which dovetails nicely with option 4, which we're also going with, which is in the motion, is sending a formal request to Southern Health and Bethesda Hospital asking that they ensure that their staff park in the designated off-street parking areas, that and they are building parking for them. And so hopefully when that is done, that will alleviate the problem. But I think a formal request, as it states here, from the city, just adds to the level of seriousness, and when they're speaking to their staff, when they're able to say to their staff, look, we have a formal request from the city, you should not be parking on the street. Use the parking that's provided for the staff parking. That's the appropriate route to go. And so again, I think this will help. We'll obviously have to continue to monitor the situation, but this is certainly a good step forward in my view.
Anything further, Councillor Siemens?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too would like to acknowledge city staff and the thoroughness of this report. I think they did a very good job with giving us all the options, but also giving the detail and also the amount of homework that went into this. The complaint was filed with City Council back in May of earlier this year, and there's been a lot of change made in that area. So I agree with the recommendation as well, with options 1 and 4 for all the reasons already stated, but also that in some form, the people will know that the parking will be alleviated in front of their place, or at least it'll be restricted somewhat on the neighboring street. But all of this really only will make improvement once that parking lot is open, and I believe it should be opening in the next 2 weeks. They've been doing the final landscaping on it. So that should be well. I think this will be a big improvement in that area, and I could talk to a few of the complaints I had, but I think this will address that, and I think we can move forward with this. I really like what that's done, especially sending a letter in the city reinforcing the fact that hospital staff need to park in staff parking. That would make a big difference.
Anything further from council? Anything closing? Yes, council, I too would like to to just remark on how thorough this report is. Our staff really did their homework and really got from the residents and from the user groups that are using the parking there. I do agree with option 1 and 4, but I also see this in other communities. Like the Bethesda Foundation or the Bethesda Hospital does have parking concerns in the residential areas around it, but that's not unlike other hospitals in our province. And if you see that, if you go into Winnipeg, there's parking issues there too. And there is construction there too in other communities as well. So these are all things that we just have to take a bit with a grain of salt. We have to have a little bit of compassion for people that do need to park. But I think in the long run, I think this will work. And when the whole expansion is done and the parking lot is finished, I think that the parking will definitely improve in the area. So we'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, we have 9A. We've got accounts payable, back of the book. Looking for a motion to approve. Councillor Hiebert, second by Councillor Hiebert. Any comments?
No comments.
Call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We've got 9B. This is bylaw 2232. This is the public lane closing for First Street. It starts on page 8 of our package. Mr. Workteam, could you please introduce this file?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. This bylaw number 2232 is a bylaw proposing to close a portion of a public lane and also to convert that public lane to a plan of works. This particular public lane closing arises due to a proposed development that was approved by council earlier this summer. Recommendation from administration is for council to give this bylaw first reading, at which time a public hearing may then be scheduled.
Thank you. Council, how would you like to proceed? Councillor Penner?
Motion to approve.
Second by Councillor Penner. Any comments?
No comments. This just allows for the public hearing to be had.
Anything further?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's good to give this first reading to bring it to the public hearing to hear what the public have to say about this enthralling and exciting thing.
Anything further for council? Anything closing?
I can't top that.
Raising.
Call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We got 9C. This is the asset management policy. We're looking for a resolution. Mr. Workteam, could you please introduce this file?
I will again defer this file to the city's corporate services manager.
Right, thank you. Yes, the policy and strategy were discussed at the SPC meeting on September 12th. And the reason it's here again today in this meeting is that for the FCM asset management grant the city received, one of the conditions in that agreement is that council formally approve the policy and strategy and with a resolution in a public meeting.
Thank you. Council, how would you like to proceed? Councillor Hiebert,
Motion to approve.
second by Councillor Spicer. Go ahead, Councillor Hiebert.
This is a very thorough plan that we have in front of us from our administration, Public Economic Development Infrastructure Program. And what we're doing is we're just approving this plan as we go forward as it's required by the province. So I'm in favor.
Anything further?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This sets out our policy in regards to how we maintain our infrastructure. This is something that we've done very well for many years. This puts it in writing, and this is we need to have this in order to be able to apply for that particular grant.
Anything further of council? Councillor Siemens?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think asset management has been a strength of the city of Steinbach for many years. This does put it in writing, but it's also a requirement under new legislation from the province, but it does meet the asset management principles. it's something that we've always had, but this formulates it, and this puts it in a really good reading context. It's fairly long-winded, but it does give us a good asset inventory along with how to maintain it. Gives us a good understanding, and we can use this document now to look at our capital funds moving forward for the next 5, 10, and future years, and it gives us a good review of where all our assets that we need to manage is at. So I like this. This is, as stated, it's a very good document as well.
Thank you. Anything further, council? Anything closing?
Nothing further.
Call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We've got 9D, the MEDIP Grant Application. This is, we have to do this by resolution. This is for Hespeler Street. Mr. Workney, could you please introduce this file?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is one of 3 applications that council has in its agenda package dealing with applications for requesting grant funding from the province of Manitoba for specific projects that the city intends to undertake over the next year, 1 to 3 years. This program, the Municipal Economic Development Infrastructure Program, was a new program that the province announced earlier this year. I'm trying to remember the exact dollar figure, but I think it's in the neighborhood of $46 million being made available to the entire province, and it is open to all municipalities. There are actually 3 separate project applications that I'm choosing to introduce all of them as they, other than the specific project itself, the application process and detail is all generally following the same format. But for 3 separate projects, firstly, proposed resurfacing on Hespeler Street in Steinbach. Secondly, proposed reconstruction of a portion of Hanover Street in Steinbach. And thirdly, proposed ventilation system improvement project at the city's fire hall. And recommendation from administration is for council to approve all 3 applications.
Thank you, Mr. Wortine. Okay, council, we'll take the first one, which is Hespeler Street. Now, at this time, how would you like to proceed? Councillor Penner,
Motion to approve.
second by Councillor Penner. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a grant application that has been forwarded from administration with regards to Hespeler Avenue and the reconstruction of Hespeler up to, I believe, Tower. That is a industrial corridor right now that is in the process of further development. There's been recent sales of land in that area, so it's good to get the infrastructure up and rejuvenated and renewed for the economic development of that area before we are fully at capacity or filled up with existing businesses. So this is good foresight of something to take advantage of a grant program to get this done ahead of time.
Thank you. Anything further?
Nothing further.
Anything further of council? Anything closing?
Further?
Well, council, call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We'll move right into 9E. This is the grant application for Hanover Street. Council, how would you like to proceed? Councillor Hiebert,
Motion to approve.
second by Councillor Siemens. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is very similar to the previous one, and this is all about keeping up our infrastructure and renewing. So I think it's a good plan for the city.
Okay, anything further? Anything further of council? Anything closing?
Nothing further.
Call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We'll go directly into 9F. This is the grant application for the fire hall. Would you, Councillor Schweitzer, second, motion?
To approve.
Make the motion. Second by Councillor Penner. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This particular application is to make upgrades to our fire hall, specifically to replace the fire hall's bay floor, and also the gear washing and locker room ventilation systems. I will say that it's early this year when the province made the announcement. There was a combination of unconditional funding, which all municipalities received, And then now, of course, there's the specific grant program that we can apply for. And so I think these are all wise projects for us to apply, and I'm certainly hopeful that we'll get, it'd be nice if we got all three of these approved, but we'll see what happens.
Who was the second?
I was,
Yes.
nothing
Anything
further to add.
Anything further of council? Anything closing? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Hiebert.
Firemen's safety and wellness and their health is foremost for the city. You know, the firemen are coming in contact with carcinogenic issues, with diesel fuel, with other drugs, fentanyl, and from various fires that they attend. So I think it's very important that we need to address the concerns of our fire chief and implement this. So I think it's a good thing, and I always support the fire department.
Thank you. Anything closing?
Nope.
Call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We've got 9G. We've got excavator license. There's a motion on page 43.
I'll take it.
Councillor Penner? Make the motion. Second by Councillor Siemens. Any comments?
Sell us, convince us.
We need things excavated.
We'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Are there any questions of council today? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. We've got number 11, correspondence petitions. We've got 11A is the minor hockey request letter. This was originally written in May 19th, 2023. And then in discussion with the board member, there was a amendment written to it in September 14th, 2023. Council, looking at the nature of this letter, because it has to do with, it's a financial ask. If you're okay with it, I would like to recommend we give this to our administration, put it on our study session so that it can be discussed better, like at length, with our budget in front of us. I think that would, to be fair, I think it's best to do it that way. It's more fair to the hockey, the minor hockey board, and it's also more fair to the city of Steinbach itself. If you have consensus, we're good to go that way? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, then, Mr. Workney, this will be put on to our study session agenda. Thank you. We've got 11B, Hanover School Division. This is the Chapel Drive no parking zone request. Council, looking at this, how would you like to proceed? Councillor Swagstra?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that we should move on the request here. And so I will make a motion. If there's a seconder, then I'll explain the reason for it. And the motion is that we essentially implement the request, which is to install no parking, well, we can read it here, but is installing no parking signs at the locations that are requested, which would be approximately 6 to 7 spaces. So I'll make that a motion, and if there's a seconder, I'll then explain the rationale.
Is there a second? Councillor Siemens? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, we all recognize that safety is of utmost importance, and in this case here, the school division has, in consultation with one of our city employees, and also using information from the RCMP, have come up with a way to make bus access safer in that area, and that basically involves the city installing several no parking signs. So that way the buses have a safer path and there's more visibility. And it's a loss of 67 parking spaces. So that's not a lot of parking spaces that get lost. But obviously, if it helps with safety, and if the school division feels that this would improve safety for students, I think it makes sense for us to go ahead with this request.
Anything further, Council?
Nothing further. I think it was said.
Anything further of Council? Councillor Penner?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple things to add. It's not very often that we have a establishment or an organization requesting less parking. Obviously, this is with good intention, though, for the safety of the students. Drive down this area quite often, and especially at times when the buses are going to be moving is when your pedestrian traffic is the highest. So I think this is a wise move for safety, and I appreciate the due diligence that HSD did to come up with this plan and the consultation with the city as well as RCMP to come up with the request. So hats off to all the organizations involved, and I'm in agreement with Councillor Zwikstra's motion.
Anything further? Anything in closing? Well, council, there's nothing to summarize. I think the comments were very clear and very well said. So I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We got 11C. We've got the Seine Rat Rosal Watershed District meeting minutes, August 15th, 2023, and August 22, 2023. Council, how would you like to proceed? Take this as information? Okay, thank you. There is no other business. Looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Penner, second by Councillor Penner. Call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Council, next regular council meeting is Tuesday, October 17th, 2023, 7:30 p.m. And just a reminder, we'll be having